Oh, lazy Sunday. What color you guys like? Based on my last couple of streams, it turns out a lot of you are a fan of orange. So let's... TrueNAS. You've clicked on this video because either A, you're interested in TrueNAS and you want to learn more about it, or B, you just want to be more like me, in which case I'm extremely flattered, but I think it's going to be the former. So what I'm going to do in this video is go over my TrueNAS setup and the one I actually use in my home lab. So this isn't really a tutorial. It's not really a, hey, I found this cool software, let me show you how to do everything magical in it. This is how I use it. So what I'm basically going to be going over today is TrueNAS Core versus TrueNAS Scale, what's the difference, and why I use TrueNAS Core. Virtualizing TrueNAS versus running it on bare metal and why I have it virtualized. I'll be going over the different pools I have set up in TrueNAS, how I have everything shared, whether that's through Samba or through iSCSI, then going over jails, and more specifically the only one I run being Nextcloud. So if any of that interests you or you just want to hear me talk, then stay tuned. Okay, first things first. When you're browsing around on the internet and you come across TrueNAS, you'll likely see that there's two different versions. There's TrueNAS Core and TrueNAS Scale. TrueNAS Core being the one that I use. TrueNAS Core is essentially what most people refer to when they just say TrueNAS. It's the original version of TrueNAS based off FreeNAS and built upon FreeBSD. And TrueNAS Scale is relatively new. It's still in beta, and the difference being that it's built on top of Linux. So it's more designed to be kind of a hypervisor as well as a NAS solution, whereas TrueNAS Core is essentially built around being a solid NAS solution with a couple of hypervisor features. I personally only care about the NAS solution because I'm running Proxmox as my hypervisor, so I went with TrueNAS Core. And Scale wasn't even out when I set everything up. All right, so virtualized versus bare metal. Which is the best for you, and why did I go with virtualized? So like I just said before, TrueNAS Core is designed to be a NAS solution first with some hypervisor features kind of sprinkled in there. I don't know what this was. Now, when I first set up my server, the plan was to have a dedicated hypervisor and use it as a NAS as well. And the hypervisor I went with was Proxmox. Now, Proxmox doesn't have really good NAS features built in at all, so I really wanted a solid NAS setup, and that's what led me to TrueNAS. Now, I didn't want to build an entire other system just to run TrueNAS, so virtualizing it made sense. And the reason virtualizing it made sense is that I passed through all the drives directly to TrueNAS, whether that's through a SATA controller or through HBA cards. Passing through your drives directly to a TrueNAS virtual machine is going to give you your best performance. Now, if you don't care about running a bunch of VMs and hypervisor stuff and you just want a dedicated NAS that performs well, then yeah, install TrueNAS on bare metal. It's not like it's a terrible hypervisor, it's just not the best. Speaking of it being a solid NAS solution, it's also running ZFS. So this isn't going to be a video going over all the different file system types, so I'm not going to go into depth of what ZFS is, but essentially it's an extremely efficient and fast storage protocol that is also very RAM heavy. So the general rule of thumb is if you're going to be using TrueNAS as your NAS solution, try to allocate at least 1 GB of RAM per 1 TB of storage. Now in my solution, I have 3 separate pools, one being my main one, which is 4 12 TB hard drives in essentially what you would call a RAID 10 configuration. Then I have a Plex pool that is 2 6 TB drives that are mirrored, and then I have a solid state pool, which is 2 2 TB solid state drives that are mirrored. Okay, so now let's dive into my setup and we can kind of go over how I have everything configured. So here it is, here's my TrueNAS dashboard. You can see nothing's really going on here, but what I've done is I've allocated 16 threads as well as 64 GB of RAM directly to TrueNAS. And as we scroll down, you'll see the 3 pools that I just mentioned. We'll talk about those in a bit, as well as I do have 10 gigabit hooked up to it to give me as much bandwidth as reasonably possible. So let's go ahead and take a look at my pools. The first one being my main one. This is, like I said, 4 12 terabyte drives, and I do have some caching on there as well. So if we dive in, you'll see from the top level, I have the 2 mirrors set up. All these are 12 terabyte drives. I have 2 separate mirrors, and then those mirrors are striped together. So I'm getting the redundancy of mirrors, but also the speed of striping. Now, if we go down, I have some logs and caching drives set up, some solid state drives, one for logging, one for caching, and then a special drive, which is essentially taking kind of that little metadata, those little reads and writes that happen during a ZFS transaction, and writing them to their own separate mirrored kind of pool, which helps speed up all transactions in ZFS so that you don't have to write all those little bits to your main devices. So if we go back, we'll take a look at the other 2. They're much more simply configured. For example, this is my Plex one. We'll go in here and it's just 2 mirrored 6 terabyte drives and no caching because, I mean, Plex, all it's doing is essentially reading from their large files, large singular files. So I don't have any caching on there. And then obviously going into an SSD pool, you're not really going to cache anything. And if you look at it, you can see I'm not using much of the space, which is a good thing because that means I won't have to be upgrading hopefully anytime soon. So those are how my drives are set up. Let's talk about how I share those to devices within my network. So the first thing you want to do is set up different users so that you can have different permissions assigned to different users within your network. And that's pretty easy to do. You'll just go into accounts, go to users. You can see the root one by default. I have a personal one set up for myself, and then I have another one set up for different services on the network. You can also make groups. I've made a SMB group, which basically says I can assign this group to whatever Samba shares that I want, meaning that whoever is assigned to that group, whatever users are in that group, get access to whatever Samba shares I want to throw on the network. So settings for it aren't complicated at all. Adding a user, you basically can just enter their name, username, password. It assigns a user ID to them. You can then set user ownership through here, or you can just wait and set network permission shares later. And groups also, it's pretty straightforward. You create a group and then you can assign it members. You can say I pretty much have everybody in here because every Samba share I create, I want everyone to have access to. So now we want to actually share devices across the network. To do that, you'll go down into sharing. And for the most part, I recommend doing a Windows share or a Samba share. And it's not that it's only going to be available on Windows machines. Samba can be used across Linux, Mac, and Windows. So creating a Windows share or a Samba share will give you access to it no matter what device you're on. I'll also be showing you how to set up an iSCSI share, but we'll get to that in a moment. So go into your Windows shares. You can see I have a few set up here. They're all relatively the same, so I'll go into one to show you how it's configured. When you set one up, you'll give it a name. You'll give it a path. So this is going to be essentially what pools you have, and you can see my 3 pools that we went over before are displayed here. Then you can kind of drill down into those and make folders or file systems for these shares. So you can see, for example, in this one, I'm using my big 4 12 terabyte drives pool. And in there, I have just created a network HDD network share folder. So once that's created, it'll ask you to create the shares or give it permissions. The way I do it is edit the file system ACL. So when you go into there, you can now specify over here who has the rights and what rights you want to give them. Now by default, the owner, and remember when we're setting up users, you can specify the owner obviously has access to everything. You don't have to have it like that, but I don't see why you wouldn't. And then you can also add an ACL item. And you can see here, I've specified that I want to give a group access to it. So I specified who, I specified a group, and then what group. Remember that SMB group I created? I can do that here. Or you can say user if you'd like. And there's all these like default users. It's kind of annoying. So scroll down to the bottom and you'll see the users you've created. Let's stay with what I had before. And you can specify the ACL type being allow, permissions type basic like a pumpkin spice latte, permissions full control. This is where you'd specify, obviously what access you want, read, modify, full control, whatever. And then you're pretty much good. hit save, and you will be able to have access to it. And then when you go into pools, you should see it show up here. Here's my network HDD. You can also edit permissions from here if you'd like. Yeah, it's essentially set up to go, and you can see here in Windows, I have it mapped already, and here we are. You can see you can navigate to it by going to your IP address / the name of it, and the name we gave it was Network HDD, and just like that, I am in here. But what about iSCSI? iSCSI is a whole different other animal. So with the Samba share, basically everybody in the house can access it. When I say house, I mean network. iSCSI is a different protocol, and basically when you create an iSCSI device or iSCSI share, it's only going to be accessed by one machine, and that one machine is essentially going to see it as a physically attached device rather than a network attached disk. So why would you want this? I know a huge reason is obviously for security, like a small office environment, and another one being that a lot of people want to host their Steam library from a NAS. And Steam doesn't play well with network shares, but it does play well with iSCSI because iSCSI essentially sees it as a physically attached device. So let's walk through how to create and set up an iSCSI share. So just like Samba, you're going to go down into sharing. You're going to click on iSCSI or block shares. And the first thing you'll see is this target global configuration. You can just leave that as default. But before we actually create the share, we have to allocate some space for the drive. Now to do that, let's go into storage. We'll go down into pools. And you can see I already have one set up. You may have seen that earlier when I was showing you my network HDD file system. You can see right above it, I have this main desktop volume. And for the comments, it's my main desktop iSCSI device that I use on my main desktop over there. Now let's create another one that I will attach to this streaming PC that I'm using right now. So first thing you're going to want to do is select which pool you want this to access. You could pick from any pool you have. I'm just going to keep it simple in the same one. So what you're going to do is go over here and click the 3 dots and then click Add ZVol. It's very important that you select ZVol and not dataset. Dataset is more for a file system and network shares, whereas ZVol is more like block storage designed specifically for iSCSI. So we'll go ahead and click Add ZVol, give it a name. We'll call this one Stream Disk. Here's where you can specify a size. The other one was 500 gigabytes. I'll give this one 500 gigabytes. I'm not going to play favorites over here. Sync, standard, compression level. You can read into these if you want. I just go with the standard LZ4. So ZFS deduplication, there's a lot that goes into it and can honestly be its own video, but for time purposes here, I will very briefly skim through it. Deduplication is basically a way to save storage by eliminating duplicated files across the drives that you have deduplication turned on for. So we're going to turn that on. Read only, inherit off, that's fine, whatever. If you want encryption, go ahead and hit submit. No. So now you can see we have 2 volumes now, our main desktop and our stream disk. We are ready to create our iSCSI share. Back to sharing, back to iSCSI block shares. Now we can enter the wizard. Kinky. So it's really easy to use. The first thing you're going to do is give it a name. I will call this one Stream. I don't remember, it's probably the same thing. Stream disk. Let's make it easy. I think that's what I called it. Here you'll select device because we created a ZVol. And when we go down to this drop down for device, you will see that we can either use our main desktop, although that's already in use. We will select our stream disk. And then down here, I don't honestly know the difference between a lot of these, so I go with Modern OS. It's worked for me, I'm sure it's fine. Next is portal. So if you haven't created one, you're gonna have to create one here. I've already created one. All that's doing is specifying a portal to connect to, which is basically your TrueNAS machine. So you can see here, it's just gonna be listed on our TrueNAS IP on the port 3260. Go to next, initiator. You're gonna wanna give this a name. You can keep it as the same name to keep it consistent. I already realized a mistake I made. You'll see that when we try to finish it here, but let's name this stream disk. Hit next and submit. And just like that, like I said, for the name, you can only use lowercase alphanumeric characters. Stream disk, submit. Okay, and just like that, it is created. The only thing you're gonna have to check is going down into services and make sure that your iSCSI service is running. And you're probably gonna wanna set that to start automatically when TrueNAS boots. So yeah, we're running. We're ready to set it up on this machine. And if you're using Windows, it has a built-in iSCSI application. So that's the thing with iSCSI. You have to be running an application to connect to the target, and Windows has one built in. It's called iSCSI Initiator. So what you're gonna do is open that, and it's not too complicated. It's actually pretty easy to get this set up. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do is go over to Configuration and change the initiator name. Now remember, we created our own initiator name just a few moments ago, and we made that Stream Disk. Click OK. Then you're gonna wanna go back to Discovery and discover Portal. And remember, when we created the portal, it was simply port 3260 on the IP address of your TrueNAS machine. In my case, that's 10.0.0.33. Click OK. Next, go over to targets. If you did this correctly, you will see your target show up. If you didn't do it correctly, it won't be here. So go back and make sure that everything is set up correctly if you don't see this here. So all you do is click on that, click connect. If you set up authorization when you did your iSCSI wizard, then you would have to enter a username and password, but I didn't. And just like that, we're connected. So now if I go down here to initiate the disk and go down to create and format hard disk partitions, when I open that, next see something popped up and said you must initialize this disk. So let's go ahead and do it. And just like that, we now have 500 gigabytes of unallocated data ready to use, as if we just plugged in a 500 gigabyte hard drive directly to the system. And you can go in and format it. iSCSI, next, finish. And just like that, it looks like we have a physical device connected directly to our system, but it's being shared across the network from our NAS. So there you go. iSCSI device set up on multiple machines with deduplication on, ready to host your Steam library without taking up too much space. Now let's take a step back and talk about something I mentioned before, being that TrueNAS Core I don't think is really that great of a hypervisor. That being mainly because it's built off of FreeBSD, and most solid hypervisors like Unraid or Proxmox or what have you are built off of Linux. And that's the main reason why TrueNAS decided to release an entire new product called TrueNAS Scale, which is built on Linux. So you can see here we have things in here like virtual machines and plugins, but it's not as robust and not nearly as feature rich as something like Proxmox or Unraid. So you can see I am running a plugin, that being Nextcloud, and if you want to do that in here, that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying if you're running this as your hypervisor, then it's going to be absolutely shitty, but I just find that Proxmox or Unraid would be a better solution, but you do you. So when you want to add a plugin or an app, whatever you want to call it, you're going to have to specify where you want these apps to be stored, on which pool, and that being your jail is what they call it for FreeBSD apps. So mine are all running on my main pool. You can select whichever one you want. And then if you want to install something, you can either choose from the few that are officially supported by TrueNAS and IX Systems, or you can select the community apps. So you can scroll through here, and whoever designed that this should just be one long horizontal scroll is basically Satan. But yeah, I mean, you can see pretty popular applications here. There's Sonar, Radar, a lot of things, OpenVPN, something to do with Minecraft, Home Assistant, Grafana. So there's no shortage of things in here, assuming you want some of the most popular apps, but it's just not as intuitive or easy to use as a Linux-based system with Docker. If you want to take a look at it once it's complete and finished, you can look at all the settings here. I hate when it does this. You can see the status of it. It's up and running. It gives you a portal to your GUI. Super easy to get to. If you want to go in and customize some settings, you can do that. Almost like a Docker container, but not quite. So, and navigating to it is just like any other Nextcloud installation, whether that's in TrueNAS on a jail, whether that's in Docker, whether that's directly onto a Linux VM, doesn't matter. After everything's installed, it's all relatively the same. So yeah, that's the gist of how I use TrueNAS. And I am a very big ambassador of using TrueNAS as your NAS solution. Overall, if you're looking to build out your own NAS, I highly recommend going with TrueNAS. Whether you choose core or scale, that's entirely up to you. But that's it. I hope you learned something today. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm curious to know if you're using TrueNAS or if you're using something different like Open Media Vault. Let me know down in the comments what you're running and if you're running it on bare metal or if it's virtualized. But that's all I have for you today. If you like this video, drop a like. If you like content like this, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.